This is a production of Cornell University.
All right, thank you, Andy, for nice introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank Andy and Tony for inviting me for this seminar and for giving me this opportunity to share some of our work we are doing in Asia, specifically on weed management. And it's a very delighting moment for me. It's it's always an honor, when you get opportunity to speak at your own alma mater. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And the topic of my talk is challenges and opportunities for sustainable weed management in rice wheat cropping systems. Before starting my presentation, I would like to acknowledge all my co-authors, especially Dr. R.K. Malik, who is a senior agronomist at Summit. Right now is retired, but consultant with Summit, and Andy, with who I work very closely on this project, and many other collaborators I cannot list because it's a long list. And moreover, I also would like to acknowledge the donors who have funded various projects. And because of those projects, we were able to do this, what I'm going to present today. Some of the donors are USAID and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, funding CISA project, which Andy used to lead before moving to Cornell. And then various public and private institutions supporting Direct Seed Rice Consortium through their membership, which I'm leading at ERI. And then also Swiss Agency for Development, SAC, they're supporting Cory Gap project, which is closing rice yield gap in Asia, and Philippine government for supporting water rice project. So what I have done is I have divided my presentation into three parts. First one is talking about food security challenges and weed management issues in rice wheat systems, and then opportunities for sustainable weed management. And in the end, I'll conclude. So let me start with the food security challenges in India. So one of the challenges that, by 2050, we will be requiring about 140 million tons of milled rice in India, compared to current 113 million tons. Similarly, to meet the demand of wheat, 140 million tons of wheat will be required. Currently, we are 100 million tons of wheat. It means that this extra 27 million tons of rice and 40 million tons of wheat, we have to produce with less resources in future because they're becoming scarce, with lower environmental footprint and under changing climatic condition. And that's a big task. But there are opportunities are also there. One opportunity is to reduce the yield losses caused by weeds, which can lead to higher productivity and can help in meeting those targets by 2050, and also can close the profitability gap if we can reduce the yield losses caused by weeds. And if you look at the data in India, these are the actual yield losses in rice and wheat. Actual mean these are the losses happening despite the current farmers' weed management practices. So in rice, in transplanted rice, about 14% of yield losses. In direct seeded rice, about 21% losses. And in wheat, about 19% yield losses. And these are based on the All India Coordinated Weed Management Trial across India. If you look at economic losses, by combining rice and wheat together, about $0.7 billion annually. So if we can, reduce these losses, it's gonna close the yield gap caused by weeds, as well as it's gonna close the profitability gaps. I'm going to spend some time on talking about drivers of change and how those drivers of change are changing the direction of weed science in Asia, particularly. If you look at drivers of change in Asia or in India, particularly, the labor and water becoming scarce. Because these resources are scarce and becoming expensive, the production cost is increasing, leading to lower profitability to the farmers, and climate change. To adapt to these drivers, the agronomy is also changing. And if you look at agronomy, there's increased interest to shift from PTR, stand for puddle transplanted rice, to DSR stands for direct seed rise, to address the issue of labor and water. And also there's increased interest to shift from flooding to alternate wetting and drying of water management to save water, transitioning from conventional till to zero tillage or conservation tillage to reduce the cost of production. And also because of cost of production and labor availability is less, there's increased shift from hand weeding based weed control to herbicide based weed control. And also the new technology like herbicide tolerant rice technology are coming also in the region. This technology has many advantages, but there are many weed-related issues has emerged under these new systems. And some of those issues are, in the new system, the weed flora are more diverse, and it's very difficult to control them with a single method. And that's why there's a higher risk of yield losses due to weeds in the newer system. There is shift towards weed flora, towards difficult to control weed like weedy rice in direct seeded rice system. Because of more and more dependence on herbicide to save the cost and labor, there's a risk of herbicide resistance in weed, higher risk of human health and environmental safety. Overall, in newer system, weed management is becoming more and more knowledge intensive. So to address these issues, what needs to be done? This is what we're doing in the region. Basically, I think what we have to do is to develop a reconnaissance system. What I mean to reconnaissance system is that a system which can monitor weed flora at scale, characterize spatial distribution of troublesome weed. This system can act as an early warning system to alert emerging threat of weed, and also to understand what farmers are doing, what are the knowledge gaps, and based on that, we identify the entry points to close those knowledge gaps. Another thing we have to do is basically to develop and deploy integrated weed management strategies, and also to create enabling environment for large-scale adoption of sustainable weed management practices. Now I'm going to talk about these three one by one. Let me start with the reconnaissance system for monitoring weed flora at scale. And to establish this system under CISA project, we started this landscape diagnostic survey in collaboration with the KVKs. KVKs stands for Krishi Vigyan Kendras, means Agriculture Science Center, and these are at every district level in India. For landscape diagnostic survey in rice, we did in 8 states, starting from northwest Punjab, Haryana, all the way to the south, covering about 75 districts with a household of about more than 14,000 households. In wheat, we covered 5 states and 55 districts, roughly about 7,600 households. And these are sampling points. And for sampling, what we did is basically randomly selected 30 villages per district. And within each village, we selected 7 households. So roughly 210 households per district. In terms of data collection, for weed purpose, we asked farmers to list the most common weeds of rice and wheat, and then we asked them to rank them as the top 5 troublesome weeds. And for more accurate weed ID, what we did is basically we used posters with high quality photographs with mature plant, and then we pre-tested so that farmers can easily identify those weeds and familiar about those weeds. And all agronomic practices were also collected, production practices, with key social and site characterization of the data. And all this information was collected from the farmer's largest plot, and data was collected digitally using ODK platform. Just zooming into one state, Bihar, which is basically, we covered all the districts of Bihar. 31 districts in Bihar was covered in this survey. And this is the 12 most common weeds infesting rice field in 31 districts of Bihar On y-axis are different districts. On x-axis is basically different weed species. And number 1 means that the most common weed, the highest frequency, and 12th is the 12th most common weed. And you can see that some weed species are, kind of cosmopolitan. They are present in every district. And these are like the weed species which are closely associated with rice. So if rice is grown, you'll expect these weeds to be there. But there are many other weeds which are associated with specific districts, not in all districts. Taking example of weedy rice. So weedy rice was reported only in 8 districts. This is top 5 troublesome weed species infesting Bihar. And same results basically. There are some weed species like Cahinoclova, and there's some perennial weeds, some sedges. They were more common across districts, but other weeds were specific to specific districts. Again, taking example of weedy rice, although among top 12 most common weeds was reported in 8 districts, but troublesome was reported only in 4 districts. If you look at the spatial distribution of some of the perennial weeds, Cynodon dactylon, which is Bermuda grass, and Cypress rotundus, which is purple nutsedge. And you can see that they're kind of identical. Wherever Cynodon dactylon is present, Cypress rotundus is also present. So they follow the trend. So, but more interesting that only in Odisha, Bihar, West Bengal, and Andhra Pradesh, these perennial weeds were more problem than other states. And we can look at why is this. We know some of the reasons why it is, but we will look at data more closely. It's linked with long fallow in Odisha, linked with poor land preparation in Bihar and West Bengal, and Andhra Pradesh linked to the cropping system. So after rice, they take black gram, and the black gram is upland crop where this perennial weeds can propagate. So this kind of information now is coming up that these perennial weeds are becoming problem. So we need to develop integrated weed management strategy for these perennial weeds in these states. If you look at the weedy rice, it's still not widely spread in only in few pockets. So this reconnaissance system connects the early warning system. You can see that weedy rice is an emerging weed. It's not widespread in only in few location, and we need to increase awareness about this weed to prevent its spread. And we have to start thinking about developing solution so that we are prepared before it becomes a big problem. If you look at wheat, similar story. There are many weeds like Chenopodium album, Polaris minor, Polypogon. These are kind of a widespread across all districts, but other weed species are specific to specific districts. Overall, if what we're getting out of this is this, the spatial information on the distribution of problematic weeds can help us in developing and deploying appropriate weed management products in specific districts as per weed flora. And I'm giving an example of wheat here. If you look at these 2 weed species, both are broadleaf, Lathyrus afaca and Solanum nigrum. And normally, metsulfuron is widely used. Metsulfuron is okay for Lathyrus, but it will not control Solanum. So for controlling Solanum in those 3 districts or 4 districts, we have to make sure that carfentrazone is placed and available to the farmers in those districts, which is not widely available currently. Another example is Polaris minor and Polypogon. These are both grass weed species, and you can see that sulfosulfuron is widely recommended, and it's very effective for Polaris minor. But sulfosulfuron based mixture will not control Polypogon. And if Polypogon is becoming widespread, probably the sulfosulfuron will not be very effective in long run. So we have to think about pinoxadan, which is registered in India, but it's not available in Bihar state. So we have to think about deployment of these new products which can effectively control the emerging weed species. So this was about the weed species, but now if you look at what are the practices farmers are using to control weeds, again, taking example of Bihar state, you'll be surprised to see that 30% of the farmers are not doing anything for weed control in wheat crop in Bihar state. And about 50% farmers use herbicide-based weed control, and 20% farmers still using hand weeding. If you zoom in further within Bihar, looking at especially district-wise, the font with red color is basically farmers are not doing any weed control in wheat. And the black font is saying basically farmers are using herbicide-based weed control. And the one with the circle, those are the districts where 40 to 60% of the farmers not controlling weed at all. So these are the districts where we can expect more impact of the weed control. And our energy should be focused on those districts where still 40 to 60% farmers are not controlling weeds. So this kind of information we can get out of these kind of diagnostic surveys. If you look at the rice, the current weed management practices, it's in contrast to wheat. In rice, majority of the farmers, they are controlling weeds by some method. More than 95% farmers are controlling weeds in rice, except in Chhattisgarh state. Still 36% farmers are not controlling weeds in rice in Chhattisgarh. So there's a need of more awareness about the importance of weed control in Chhattisgarh. But if you look at the practices, most of the states in Odisha and Bihar particularly, about 70% farmers rely on hand weeding. And in Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, and Uttar Pradesh, 30 to 45% farmers still depend on hand weeding. And Punjab, Haryana is mostly herbicide based. And if you look at the impact of the weed management practices on the yield of rice, for example, the hand weeding is the most common. As compared to hand weeding, what we have seen that rice yields were higher when farmers use herbicide-based integrated weed control. Herbicide-based mean herbicide plus hand weeding generally, and then other like land preparation and stuff like that. So 6 to 16% higher yield when they use herbicide plus hand weeding as compared to when they rely only on hand weeding. Moreover, in many of the eastern states of India, the herbicide farmers are using are older herbicide, and they are not very broad spectrum, but new herbicides are available which are safer and broad spectrum. So we expect with a newer herbicide, even the effect would be higher, the yield advantage would be higher. So our next step would be doing more spatial analytics to develop digital weed maps, and also mapping hotspots for potential emerging problem, whether the perennial weed species emerging, whether herbicide resistance potentially emerging, or where the weedy rice is emerging. So that's one task. And then we are already working with the national partners to develop web-based portal with actionable output for district or state level extension agency with entry points to close yield gap and improve input use efficiency. Moving to the second topic, developing and deploying integrated weed management. So let me go through quickly about background about rice wheat production system. So two crops, rice and wheat, are grown in a calendar year. Rice dominantly by puddle transplanting system. And this method consists of three operations: puddling, which is a wet tillage, and you can see that is an intensive tillage, require a lot of energy and water. Transplanting, where from nursery seedlings are transplanted when about 30 days old in the main field, and you can see it's a labor intensive and mostly done by the women farmers. And then for majority of the period, the fields are kept flooded, so require large amount of water. This method has many advantages, particularly for weed control, because flooding control weeds effectively, and also ensure good crop establishment because the seedling is transplanted. But in current scenario, many issues are emerged. One of, you can see that it's a resource intensive method. It requires intensive tillage, requires large amount of labor, water, and all these resources are becoming scarce and expensive, overall making this method less and less attractive and economical. Also, flooded rice are considered one of the major culprit for methane emission, one of the key greenhouse gas. And we have seen that puddling is good for rice, but it has adverse effect on succeeding non-rice crop like wheat. So the wheat yield what we have observed is 10% higher if grown after non-puddle rice compared to after puddle rice. So immediately after rice, second crop of wheat is grown. There's a short turnaround period between two crops. But after puddling, farmers do intensive tillage for fine seed bed preparation for wheat. And majority of the farmers, they burn the residue just to clean the field and get ready for planting for wheat. So the major issues with wheat are its intensive tillage leads to late planting. And you can see that the relationship between planting date and wheat yield. So the delay the planting, the drastic reduction in the wheat yield. Burning of residue leads to environmental pollution, greenhouse gas emission, and nutrient loss. And Phalaris minor, one of the important weed of wheat, has evolved resistance to many herbicides. So what we need is basically alternate methods which are labor, water, and cost effective and have a lower environmental footprint. And these are some of the alternate options for rice and wheat. In rice, it's a dry seeded rice is one option in which dry seed is sown directly in the main field in non-puddle condition. Whereas a wet seeded rice is basically pre-germinated seeds are sown directly in the main field in the puddle field. So land preparation is similar to puddle transplant rice, only crop establishment is changing. Whereas in dry DSR, both land preparation and crop establishment is changing. Dry DSR is more common where labor and water are becoming scarce. Wet seeded rice is more common where water is still available, but labor becoming issue. For wheat, zero tillage wheat is a good alternative. And these are the different benefits of these technologies. In DSR, I don't need to go through, but you can read it. Resource saving, higher income, time saving, good for soil health, and lower global warming potential. But there are trade-offs, and this trade-off is linked with the weed management. So weeds are one of the major constraints in large-scale adoption of these technologies, because if you save labor, you save water, you save tillage. I mean, you cannot get everything, benefit, right? There are trade-offs. Weed are the trade-off, and therefore there's a need to develop integrated weed management practices which are effective, profitable, sustainable, so that these practices can be adopted widely. So now I'm going to talk about integrated weed management. And IWM is basically integration of multiple practices. In weed science, we call a man-in-little hammer approach, which is more sustainable and effective, and is built on around strong foundation of weed ecology and weed biology. Instead of using a single method like a chemical weed control, a large hammer, which is not sustainable. Now, what are the opportunities for weed management, IWM in wheat? Quickly on major weeds of wheat in rice wheat system. Phalaris minor, little canary grass, is the most important weed, which can cause yield loss up to 80%. And this weed species has evolved resistance to majority of the herbicide registered in India, particularly in northwest part of India, Punjab and Haryana. So it's a really, really big problem. In addition to Phalaris minor, these are other common weeds found in wheat in rice wheat system. In terms of opportunities, the biggest opportunity with us is zero tillage. Zero tillage is basically suppresses emergence of Phalaris minor. And you can see this is the study done on x-axis. We have the seed bank and top 10 centimeter layer, and on y-axis is the emerged seedlings of Phalaris minor. And you can see the first, second, and third flush. The emergence rate of Phalaris minor is lower in zero tillage compared to conventional tillage. Roughly 50% lower emergence rate in first flush and third flush. So first flush is very important from crop weed competition point of view. Also, early wheat sowing combined with rice residue mulch suppresses the emergence of Larix minor and other weed species. So that's another opportunity to control weed in wheat. And if you see the relationship of planting date with the Larix minor density, and 10th November is basically the optimum date, and early around 25th October, when you plant, about 68% lower emergence of Larix minor compared to optimum planting date, and about 80% lower compared to late planting of wheat. And if you see the relationship between Larix minor emergence and the residue mulch, for Larix minor to suppress, you need about 6 ton of residue mulch. And with 6 ton and more than 6 ton, it can reduce 45% to 75% lower emergence of Larix minor. And when you combine both early planting and the residue mulch, you can suppress about 80 to 95% of Larix minor. So instead of burning residue, it's good to use residue for mulching, which will help in suppressing the weed as well as conserve the soil moisture. And now machines are available, Happy Seeder, which can establish wheat in full residue of rice. So that's basically by Happy Seeder, residue mulch, early planting, we can almost eliminate Larix minor. You can look at the effect of residue mulch on other weed species. Similar to last study, what we found that for Larix minor, you need 6 ton or above, but other weed species are more sensitive. Even 4 ton residue drastically reduce their establishment. What we have also found that zero till is with residue also enhance post-dispersal seed predation of Larix minor. And you can see that the seed predation was 60% in zero tillers compared to 10% in conventional tillers. And this is what we found, the empty seeds was eaten by insects. If you continuously use zero tillers with residue, it can lead to depletion of feed seed bank. And this is what we did is basically cropping system trial, long-term trial, where one is basically a conventional system, conventional pearl transplant rice followed by conventional wheat. 2 is basically rice is pearl transplanting, but wheat is zero tillers with residue. 3 is rice and wheat, both are under no till. And 4 is diversified system, maize followed by wheat. And you can see that with continuous zero tillers, but after 4 years, seed bank 90 to 100%, we depleted the seed bank of Larix minor. For other species, about 70 to 100% reduction in seed bank. There was no, kind of reduction in significant reduction in seed bank of Anagalis arvensis, despite this declining trend. The reason is basically because Anagalis arvensis has a longer longevity in the soil. You can see the longevity of different weed species we have seen. So Anagalis can survive longer in the soil, and probably after a few years, this will reflect in seed bank. But in the field, we didn't see Anagalis arvensis because Anagalis is also very sensitive to residue mulch. And this is what we found after 3 years, but we see that the clean field of wheat, and there was no Larix minor under conservation agriculture-based system. Whereas in conventional till, you see a lot of Larix minor. And in this long-term experiment, after 3 years of wheat, we basically didn't spray any herbicide. So for 3 years, we skipped 3 years, no herbicide after in year 4, 5, and 6. So based on these results, we can say that, after 3 years of, early planting of wheat with conservation agriculture, you can skip herbicide for 2 to 3 years. And then some weeds started coming up. Probably you have to again apply some herbicide for 3 years. Moving to direct seeded rice, the weeds are a big problem in DSR. Why? If you look at transplanted rice, so these are 3 operations I discussed: purling, which control weeds at early stage during land preparation time. Transplant has give a head start to the crop because of age advantage, 30 days older seedlings versus emerging weed species. And in transplant rice, you can use early flooding in the day of transplanting, and which is effective herbicide. But in DSR and dry DSR, we lost all these three operations, which was the option for weed control in transplanted rice. So dry DSR, there's no puddling and directly sown, so there's no advantage of seedling A's, and DSR is sensitive. So rice is sensitive at early stage of germination and emergence. So we cannot flood the field for weed control early in DSR. That's the disadvantage with DSR. So that's why there's more weeds. In wet DSR, puddling is still option, but advantage of transplant and early flooding is gone. That's why there's more weeds in DSR. That's why farmers are more dependent on herbicide, leading to higher weed control cost and greater risk of field losses. What are the opportunities? How we can manage weeds in DSR? First one is soil mulch DSR, which can inhibit recruitment of weeds and also save irrigation water. Let me explain what soil mulch is. It's a very simple, agronomic adjustment. So this is a standard practice of DSR. Normally, field is prepared, and then rice is sown in dry condition, and then immediately after seeding, there is a irrigation is applied, and this irrigation is basically to ensure good crop establishment. But this irrigation also create a best condition for wheat to emerge. So along with rice, weeds are also emerging. So what we did is basically adjust a little bit. Instead of using irrigation after seeding, use pre-sowing irrigation. So pre-sowing irrigation will initiate wheat to germinate, and then when the field is under field condition, then you prepare the field, use the tillage, and the tillage will kill those emerging weeds and will also break the capillaries. And then in that moist condition, you seed the crop and then have a light planting, and you delay first irrigation for 2 to 3 weeks. And this tillage basically they break the capillary and create the soil mulch. The soil surface dries, 2 to 3 centimeters dries very quickly in a couple of hours, where the most of the weeds are sitting. So that's why there's a very low germination or emergence of weeds. But moisture is conserved below 3 centimeters, where the rice seeds are sitting. So in this way, we can save moisture and save irrigation and reduce the recruitment of weed emergence. And this is the results. You can see this is soil mulch DSR, which is established after pre-sowing irrigation, and this is established after irrigation immediately after seeding. And you can see that crop is, lines are very clear. There's no weeds in between rows. Whereas in this scenario, a lot of weeds are growing. That's why the lines are not visible. So what we found about 50 to 65% lower weed density and weed biomass, which ultimately led to higher yield of rice under DSR. In Punjab, we did another study to optimize when to irrigate, first irrigation under soil mulch DSR, right? Whether it's 2 weeks is right time or 3 weeks is right time, whether there is any yield penalty if we delay further. So what we found that, whether you irrigate immediately after seeding, after soil mulch DSR, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, yields are similar. But you get the advantage in terms of weed control. So 65% lower weed density and weed biomass when you delay first irrigation by 14 days or 21 days. And as you delay the irrigation, compared to applying immediately after seeding, there's 6% water saving if you delay by 2 weeks, and about 12% water saving if you delay by 3 weeks. Another opportunity is to identify weed competitive and high yielding rice varieties. And this study was done in Bihar, Patna, at CISA research platform. And it was a split plot experiment where main plot was duration of weed competition, starting from 5 days after seeding to maturity, maximum competition from 15 days to maturity, 30 days to maturity, simulating different classes of weeds, and no competition, weed free. And then we used 11 varieties, a mix of hybrids and inbred. So in shorter duration category, 1 hybrid, 1 inbred, as a check. And then in medium duration category, we use 6 hybrids and 1 inbred check. And in long duration category, we use 2 inbred because there's no long duration hybrids. And in this study, we use purple rice as a kind of a surrogate weed so that we can maintain the same density across treatment. And we planted purple rice between rice rows at 5 centimeter spacing. And if you look at the results, it's very interesting. Hybrids were more weed competitive, and they are very high yielding as well. So you can see that these 2 hybrids particularly, they are highest yielding, and and this is like a different duration of weed competition. So they maintain very high yield even under full competition, 5 days to maturity. In variety 5 hybrid, only 14% yield loss is under full weed competition. Another variety is V6, which is also maintain high yield, and under weed-free conditions, very high yield. This is another variety which also very weed competitive, only 17% yield losses, but under weed-free condition, it's not very high yielding. So that probably is good under where the weed control is poor, but not good under those conditions where farmers can manage weeds better. But other inbred varieties are very sensitive to early weed competition. You can see the yield loss is 50 to 80%. But if you can control weeds for 15 days, then these varieties are, can maintain high yield. So overall, hybrids were more weed competitive and higher yielding. And you can see the advantage of hybrids over inbred varieties under different duration of weed competition. So 120% higher yield when you have a full competition with hybrid compared to inbred, and otherwise it's about 10 to 25% yield advantage in hybrids. But we found that the 36 to 53% lower weed biomass under hybrids because of the weed competitiveness. We also looked at what are the traits responsible for weed competitiveness in these hybrids. And we did this path analysis to identify the trait. What we found in an early weed biomass accumulation by the rice variety is the key trait and can be used for screening varieties for weed competitiveness. Of course, early weed biomass accumulation is controlled by multiple traits like leaf area index, tillering capacity, canopy cover, plant height. All these are the factors. But if you look at one trait, that's the early biomass. And so early biomass can be used to screen varieties for weed competitiveness under weed-free conditions. Another opportunity is to use early flooding for weed suppression using anaerobic germination tolerant rice varieties. I was telling in DSR, one of the problem is, we cannot flood the crop early to suppress the weed because rice is sensitive at germination and emergence stage. Once the crop is emerged, you can flood it. But ERI has been doing research, and they have identified donor varieties with anaerobic germination tolerance. And they have integrated that trait into mega varieties like IR64. And you can see that this is IR64 variety with anaerobic germination tolerant trait. So even if you flood it, it can establish very well. Without AG tolerant trait, the poor establishment. So with AG tolerant variety, we can do the early flooding for weed control, which will lead to good establishment as well as good weed control. We looked at in wet seeded rice the effect of early flooding. So if you look at the saturated condition, we use all the varieties established very well, but you can see a lot of weeds are popping up between the rows. When we did 2 centimeters of early flooding immediately after seeding with AG tolerant variety, establishment is good, but weed control is also good. You won't see any weeds emerging, right? In 6 centimeter flooding, establishment is good, and there's no weeds. So basically, what we found that you don't need 6 centimeter flooding. 2 centimeter flooding itself is good. And what we found is 48 hours after seeding is better than doing immediately, because immediately if you do flooding, still there's a poor establishment. So early flooding effectively control weeds. With anaerobic germination tolerant varieties, we can control in DSR. We also looked at interaction between flooding and herbicide. And you look at no flooding, no herbicide. So there are a lot of weeds and crop is coming. When we used 1/4 rate of pritlacolor as a pre-emergence herbicide and no flooding, you can see the rice are now visible and weeds are controlled, but still small weeds are there. I mean, with half rate of recommended, further, you can see the weed control is improved. With full rate, there's slightly toxicity on rice, but weed control was further improved because, and if you look at this 2 centimeter flooding, again, very less weeds are there. And when you have 2 centimeter flooding and 1/4 rate of pritlacolor, there's hardly any weeds. So what we found is that there's a positive interaction of herbicide into water, and herbicide dose can be reduced if combined with early flooding. And we found greater than 95% reduction in weed density and biomass when shallow flooding was combined with low dose of herbicide. We've been doing a lot of work on herbicide screening also, and based on multiple location, what we found that using pre-emergence herbicide followed by post-emergence and one sport hand weeding or mechanical weeding can control weeds effectively in DSR. And these are the different options. I don't need to go in detail. What is important is that in the past we were using herbicide selection based on the cost and efficacy, but it's important to select this herbicide also based on their environmental impact. And I use this Cornell resource to estimate the environmental impact quotient of different herbicide based on the field use rate. And these are the rice herbicide, and you can see that majority of the new herbicides have a lower environmental impact compared to the older herbicide like 2,4-D or pendimethalin. Similarly, in wheat, isoprotein is the old herbicide highest environmental impact, but newer herbicide have a lower environmental impact. And now we are recommending this herbicide based on these environmental impact data. Another opportunity is to integrate mechanical weeding, because mechanical weeding can save labor. And you can see the cost of mechanical weeding is about 500 rupees per hectare, whereas in manual weeding is about 2,000 to 3,000 rupees. One of the prerequisites for mechanical weeding is line sowing. So mechanical DSR facilitate that. It's establishing a line, and we can use mechanical weeding. Whereas in transplanted rice, it was random transplanting, so mechanical weeding was not possible. So that's an opportunity with line establishment of DSR. My final quickly on enabling environment for large scale adoption. So we are using for dissemination of some of these practices using existing ICT platform. So ERI has developed one of the ICT platform, Rice Crop Manager, mainly for nutrient management. Now we established, we developed weed modules, and we have integrated weed modules in this crop manager. So along with nutrient management, now the recommendation is also going for the weed management, and we tested it. What is the impact of weed modules on the productivity? So this is T1 is a farmer practice of nutrient management and weed management. T2 is same except weed management as per our recommendation through crop manager. T3 is only recommendation of crop manager for nutrient management, and T4 is recommendation of nutrient and weed management as per crop manager. And we found 8% higher yield with our newer recommendation, and when you combine nutrient and weed management, 22% higher yield. We are also developing Android-based weed app, which is under development. And our idea is that with the photographs, farmers can tick mark which are the major weeds in their field, multiple weed species, And then the recommendation should be based on the weed flora of the complex weed flora with multiple options and other than herbicide, what could be other cultural practices which can be used. So this is under development. Also, capacity development, market development of new products, and strategic partnership is critical for scaling. So we have already developed a lot of training modules, outreach material, and we having a strong partnership with private sector to deploy these new products in those geography where market development are poor. And because of multiple efforts in the CISA project, we have reached about 1.2 million households are practicing this effective and safe weed control practices in about 1.3 million hectare area. Another opportunity emerging is drone technology, because in the past, we are struggling with training farmers to use safety, and farmers are not using safety while applying herbicide in Asia. So drone technology will take care of that, because there's no human involved in spraying. So and also open up opportunity for site-specific application as well. So let me conclude. Reducing yield gap caused by weed offer a great opportunity to address the food security challenge. And weeds are the biggest constraint in large-scale adoption of in the new system. An effective IWM program will facilitate wide-scale adoption of these resource-efficient crop establishment methods. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too much over time.
You were dot on time, Virender. Thank you so much. You covered a tremendous amount of turf there. If you're still awake, I'm sure there are a couple of questions from the floor. We can limit them to 2 in interest of your general health and well-being. But let me open the floor. Would anybody like to ask Virender a question? Go ahead and unmute and ask.
I have a question.
If there aren't any other questions, I have a small question. I was curious about the stale seed bedding. So where you pre-irrigate and then you do a light tillage to create a dust mulch. I was wondering if you know what tool they're using to make such a fine dust mulch, only 2 or 3 centimeters.
So thank you for the question. We are not using special tool. This is normal, tillage operation. And the tillage is around 5 to 7 centimeter. But what is happening is basically the top 2 centimeter layer is drying up. Below, its moisture is conserved. So it's not that we are only tilling 2 to 3 centimeter. Tillage is going up to 5 to 7 centimeter. But that tillage creates surface mulch. And then top 2 centimeter dries very quickly because of high temperature around 40 degrees Celsius at the time. And then the capillary is broken, so moisture loss is stopped because of that surface soil mulch.
Thanks. And are they using like a disc, or I saw that when I know that sometimes when they're puddling they'll use a rototiller. What do they use for this? Yeah,
I mean farmers are using harrowing and even rototiller. Yeah, rotavator.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Virender, there's a general comment that they're just giving you thanks for a wonderful presentation, and also saying that you gave so much to chew on that it has to all soak in. So I think that there may be more questions upon reflection. But Uri, I don't know if you're connected still. Do you want to give one more shot at asking a question? Otherwise, we should probably close because we're approaching 5 minutes over. Okay, hang on one sec. So Uri's question, Virender, and this is the last one we'll take, is that yeah. I imagine that nitrogen limitation is an issue in both the flooded rice systems due to leaching and the mulch system due to N tie-up from the wheat decomposition. Do you have any sense for which approach has less possibility for N stress in rice?
N stress, I think, it's not a big problem in DSR or flooded system, but I think slightly more available in flooded system because of the pH, which get close to neutrality. But the losses are higher, different kind of losses. So in dry direct seeding rice, there's a more nitrous oxide losses because of more aerobic condition. Whereas in I think flooded system, more ammonia volatilization losses are more. So the losses are different. Slightly, I mean, probably right now we're using same fertilizer of nitrogen, but probably time of application, we normally advise one extra split of nitrogen in DSR, or maybe one booster dose of foliar application. That's how we're doing it. But generally, nitrogen is not a big problem. Micronutrients become a big problem, particularly micronutrients like iron and zinc under direct seeding system. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Virender. We really deeply appreciate you coming in today and staying up till 2:30 in the morning. So virtual round of applause for you. And we look forward to having you at Cornell over the summer. But thank you, everybody, for joining today. And welcome back to the semester. Thanks again, Virender.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.